I thought my daughter had married a content creator who made people smile. I had no idea that 3 years later, I'd be staring at my phone screen, watching him hold her captive in front of 300,000 viewers. With a countdown timer and a price tag for her freedom. He thought I would negotiate. He thought I would beg, cry, wire money, call the police, and wait helplessly while they __0_. He thought I would play the role of desperate mother, that I would validate his power, that I would give him exactly what he wanted. Attention, money, and proof that he could control us all. He thought wrong. By the time that live stream hit the 15-minute mark, I had already made the only call that mattered. And by the time he realized I wasn't playing his game, it was far too late for him to stop what was coming. Вы правы, извините. Сейчас напишу полную версию на 60 тысяч символов. Расширю все сцены, добавлю больше деталей, диалогов и промежуточных твистов. I thought my daughter had married a content creator who made people smile. I had no idea that 3 years later, I'd be staring at my phone screen, watching him hold her captive in front of 300,000 viewers. With a countdown timer and a price tag for her freedom. He thought I would negotiate. He thought I would beg, cry, wire money, call the police, and wait helplessly while they __1_. He thought I would play the role of desperate mother, that I would validate his power, that I would give him exactly what he wanted. Attention, money, and proof that he could control us all. He thought wrong. By the time that live stream hit the 15-minute mark, I had already made the only call that mattered. And by the time he realized I wasn't playing his game, it was far too late for him to stop what was coming. Before the stream, the quiet years. 6 months earlier, I had been standing in my kitchen on a Sunday morning in early spring. The kind of peaceful routine I'd built over 30 years of marriage. The coffee maker gurgled its familiar song, a sound I'd heard 10,000 times, as reliable as my own heartbeat. Sunlight streamed through the window over the sink, catching dust motes in golden shafts, illuminating the herbs I grew on the windowsill: basil, rosemary, thyme. The scent of brewing coffee mixed with the faint sweetness of the lilacs blooming outside. My husband, Richard, sat at the breakfast table reading the newspaper. Yes, the actual paper. Delivered to our doorstep every morning at 6:15 without fail. We were creatures of habit, and we liked it that way. There was comfort in routine, in knowing what came next, in the gentle predictability of a life well lived. Richard wore his reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, occasionally making small disapproving sounds at whatever political nonsense he was reading. His gray hair was still damp from his morning shower. His coffee sat in the same blue mug he'd used for 20 years, chipped on the handle but irreplaceable. This was our life. Simple, quiet, safe. My phone buzzed against the counter, disrupting the morning peace. A text from Emma, my daughter, my only child, the center of my universe for 28 years. Quote 2. My heart lifted immediately. Weeks. It had been almost 6 weeks since I'd seen Emma in person. 6 weeks of short text messages, missed phone calls, excuses about being busy. I missed her with an ache that had become chronic, a dull, constant pain I'd learned to live with. I smiled, typing back immediately, with the speed of someone who'd reluctantly joined the modern age. Of course, sweetheart. I'll make that lemon herb chicken you love. Noon? The response came quickly. Perfect. Bringing Blake too. My smile faltered. Just slightly. Just enough that I had to consciously reset my expression. Blake. My son-in-law of 3 years. I tried to keep the smile on my face genuine as I set the phone down, but I could feel it becoming artificial, a performance for an audience of one, myself. Richard glanced up from his newspaper, his eyes sharp despite his 63 years. He'd spent 35 years as a forensic accountant, investigating fraud and financial crimes. Reading people was his specialty, and reading me was as easy as reading that newspaper. Quote 5, he asked, though he already knew the answer from my expression. Quote 6, I confirmed, opening the refrigerator to check what I had. Eggs, butter, a half-empty container of cream, leftover vegetables. I'd need chicken, fresh lemons, maybe some wine, though Blake probably wouldn't drink it. He was always quote 7 or quote 8, or following some influencer diet trend. Richard folded his newspaper carefully, creasing it along the same lines he'd creased 10,000 newspapers before, and looked at me with that direct, unflinching gaze that had made countless white-collar criminals confess to their crimes. You don't like him. It wasn't a question. After 32 years of marriage, Richard could read me like that newspaper, every line, every crease, every hidden meaning between the words. Quote 10, I said carefully, pulling out eggs, butter, checking dates on packages, buying myself time to formulate a diplomatic answer. Quote 11, that was true as far as it went. But it wasn't the whole truth. Blake Richardson, 29 years old. Though he looked perpetually 25, thanks to what I suspected was Botox and expensive skincare. 6'2", gym-sculpted physique that he maintained with religious devotion and documented obsessively online. Perfectly styled hair that probably required more products and time than my entire morning routine. Teeth so white they were almost blue. Clothes that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. A smile that was charming and empty in equal measure. He called himself a lifestyle influencer and digital entrepreneur. What that meant in practical, concrete terms, I had never quite grasped. He had no office to go to, no boss to report to, no schedule I could identify or understand. He filmed himself. Constantly. Every meal became content. Every outing became a photo opportunity. Every moment with Emma became material for his channels, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, platforms I barely understood and he treated like oxygen. What does he actually do? Richard had asked me once, genuinely baffled. He exists, I'd replied, unable to articulate it better. Quote 15. When Emma and Blake had started dating 4 years ago, she'd been 24, finishing her master's degree in library science at the State University. She'd had plans, clear, specific, achievable plans. A career at the university library, maybe pursuing a doctorate eventually. A quiet life surrounded by books and research, and the kind of meaningful work that doesn't generate likes or followers, but changes lives in small, important ways. She'd been radiant with purpose, glowing with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly who they were and what they wanted. Then Blake had swept in with his ring lights and his charm and his promises of adventure. You're too special to hide in a library, he'd told her, and she'd believed him. Within 6 months, she'd deferred her studies. Within a year, she'd dropped out entirely. I'm helping Blake build his brand, she'd explained to me over lunch, her eyes bright but somehow vacant, like a light had been turned on behind them, but no one was home. Quote 18. I'd wanted to ask, what are you building? What does it mean? What happens when the followers get bored? But I'd stayed silent, watching my daughter slip away into a world I didn't recognize. They'd gotten married 2 years ago in a destination wedding in Bali, live-streamed, naturally, to Blake's followers. 200,000 people had watched my daughter say her vows on a beach at sunset, while I sat in the audience wearing a dress Blake's, quote, 19 had selected for me. Quote, 20. feeling like an extra in someone else's production. Every moment had been choreographed. Every kiss, every tear, every speech, all performed for the camera. Even the vows had been edited for content, shortened for attention spans, optimized for engagement. I'd cried during the ceremony. Everyone assumed they were tears of joy. They weren't. Now, 3 years into their marriage, Emma rarely called. When she did, Blake was always there. Always in frame if it was a video call, always listening if it was audio, always present. I missed my daughter. I missed the girl who would curl up on the couch with a book and read for 6 hours straight, so absorbed she'd forget to eat. I missed the girl who would call me at midnight to discuss a novel she'd just finished, her voice animated with excitement about themes and symbolism and character development. I missed the girl who used to bake cookies with me on rainy afternoons, flour dusting her nose, laughing at her own mistakes. That girl was gone, and I didn't know how to get her back. Quote 21, Richard said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. Maybe we'll actually get to talk to her. Maybe, I echoed, but I didn't believe it either. I grabbed my purse and keys, Richard said dryly. I laughed despite myself, kissed his cheek, and headed out into the spring morning to prepare for a lunch I was already dreading. The lunch that revealed everything. They arrived at 12:15, fashionably late in a way that Blake probably thought was sophisticated, but I found simply rude. I was taking the chicken out of the oven when I heard his voice before I even heard the door open. Blake's voice boomed through our home, loud and performative. Shout out to Mom and Pops. Look at this classic suburban setup. Major nostalgia vibes, right? Real Americana here? I set down the roasting pan and walked to the entryway. Blake stood in our living room, phone held high in selfie mode. Already filming, already performing. He was wearing designer jeans that probably cost $500 and a white t-shirt that somehow also looked expensive. His hair was styled in that carefully casual way that required 45 minutes and 3 products. He grinned at his phone camera, that practiced influencer smile that engaged every muscle in his face except his eyes. He panned the camera across our living room, our private space, our home, the place where we'd raised our daughter and built our life. He narrated as he filmed. Quote 29. He was mocking us. Gently, playfully, in a way his followers would find funny. But he was mocking us in our own home, to hundreds of thousands of strangers, without asking permission. Richard's expression was stone. He didn't stand, didn't greet Blake, just watched with the patient, analytical gaze of someone documenting evidence. Emma followed behind Blake, quieter, almost invisible in his shadow. She looked thin, too thin. Her blonde hair, once thick and lustrous and always smelling of her favorite vanilla shampoo, hung limp around her shoulders, dull and lifeless. Dark circles shadowed her eyes beneath a carefully applied layer of makeup. Foundation too pale for her skin tone, concealer that didn't quite hide the exhaustion. She wore a designer blouse, silk or something like it, in a color that didn't suit her. Blake's choice, I was certain. Quote 30, she said, hugging me briefly. The embrace was stiff, performative, like she'd forgotten how to hug naturally. She smelled different. Expensive perfume that was too heavy, too adult. Something Blake had probably bought. Not the light, natural scents she used to prefer. Not like Emma at all. Hi, sweetheart. I held her a moment longer than she expected, feeling the sharpness of her shoulder blades through her designer blouse. Her collarbone protruded. Her wrists were thin as a child's. She pulled away and I saw it. That quick, nervous glance toward Blake, seeking approval or permission, or maybe just checking his mood. Quote 34. Busy. She used that word constantly now. Too busy to visit, too busy to call, too busy to be my daughter, too busy to have her own life. Quote 35, Richard said, his voice quiet but firm, not a request, a command. Blake lowered the phone slowly, his smile never faltering but something cold flickering behind his eyes. Quote 36, quote 37, Richard replied evenly. The temperature in the room dropped to 10 degrees. Blake's smile became sharper, more predatory. Everything's content, Pops. That's the world now. Adapt or die, right? Let's eat, I interjected quickly, desperate to avoid a confrontation before we even sat down. Everything's ready. Lunch was tense from the first moment. I'd set the table carefully. Our good dishes, fresh flowers from the garden, cloth napkins. I'd made Emma's favorite meal, lemon herb chicken with roasted vegetables and garlic mashed potatoes. Comfort food. The food of her childhood. Blake dominated the conversation immediately, barely pausing to breathe between sentences. He talked about subscriber counts, engagement metrics, click-through rates, brand partnerships, sponsorship deals. Words that meant nothing to me, that reduced human connection to numbers and transactions. Quote 41, he said, cutting his chicken into precise, tiny pieces, but not actually eating any of it. Quote 42, quote 43, I said, though I couldn't summon much enthusiasm. And Emma, how are you? Emma's crushing it, Blake interrupted smoothly, reaching over to squeeze her hand. She flinched, just slightly, just enough that I noticed. She's my secret weapon. Behind every successful man, right? She handles all the boring logistics so I can focus on the creative side, the talent side, division of labor. It works. Behind every successful man is a woman doing unpaid labor, I thought, but didn't say. Quote 47, Richard said carefully, cutting his own food with deliberate precision. Quote 48. The question landed like a grenade on the table. Emma's eyes widened. Dad, it's not like that. It's exactly like that. Richard continued, his accountant brain engaged now, analytical and relentless. You work full-time. You have specific responsibilities. You generate value for a business entity. What compensation do you receive? We're married, Blake said, his voice hardening. What's mine is hers. We're a team, a partnership. That's how marriage works, or did they do things differently back in your generation, Pops? The condescension dripped from every word. Pops. He knew Richard hated that nickname. In my generation, Richard said quietly, women fought for financial independence. For their own money, their own careers, their own autonomy. They didn't work for free to build someone else's brand. I'm not working for free, Emma protested. But her voice was small, defensive, like she'd repeated this justification so many times she no longer believed it herself. Quote 57, quote 58, Richard asked. Silence. Quote 59. Silence, Emma whispered, tears forming in her eyes. But Richard, bless him, didn't stop. Emma, honey, I'm asking because I care about you. You gave up your education. You gave up your career plans. You work 70 hours a week for a business that legally belongs entirely to someone else. If something happens to this marriage, you have no claim to anything you've built. You understand that, right? Nothing's going to happen to our marriage, Blake said. His smile gone now, his voice cold as winter. And maybe Emma's parents should trust her to make her own decisions instead of trying to sabotage her happiness. We're not trying to sabotage anything, I said, trying to smooth things over, trying to build a bridge Blake was actively burning. We just want Emma to be safe, to be happy, to have security. She has security, Blake shot back. She has me. We're building an empire together. But maybe you can't see that because you're stuck in your small, safe, boring little world where nobody risks anything or achieves anything or matters at all. Richard's jaw clenched. I put a warning hand on his arm. Quote 70, I said, as calmly as I could manage. Quote 71, quote 72, Blake said, standing up abruptly. His chair scraped against our hardwood floor, leaving a mark I'd probably find later. By millions of people who follow our journey and support what we're building. Maybe that's worth more than the approval of two people who are terrified of anything that doesn't fit in their tiny little box. Blake, let's just go, Emma said quietly, standing as well, her meal barely touched. Thank you for lunch, Mom. I'm sorry. She was apologizing for him, for his behavior in our home. That's what it had come to. I walked them to the door, my heart breaking with every step. At the threshold, I pulled Emma into a hug. She was so thin, so fragile, like she might shatter. Quote underscore 76 underscore, I whispered in her ear, low enough that Blake couldn't hear as he walked ahead to the car, already on his phone, already moving on. If you ever need anything, anything at all, day or night, no questions asked, you call me. Do you understand? She nodded against my shoulder, and I felt wetness, tears soaking into my shirt. I love you, I whispered. I know, she breathed. And then she pulled away and followed her husband to his Tesla. Leased, I would later learn, at a rate he could barely afford, part of the performance of success that was more image than reality. I watched them drive away, Blake gesticulating as he talked, Emma small and silent in the passenger seat. And I felt a cold knot of dread settle in my stomach, like a stone. He's going to hurt her, Richard said quietly, standing beside me at the window, his hand finding mine. Emotionally, financially, maybe physically. He's going to hurt her, and she can't see it. I know, I whispered. I know. But what can we do? She's an adult. She chose him. She won't listen to us. We document everything, Richard said, his forensic accountant brain already working. We watch. We wait. And when she's ready to leave, we make sure she has everything she needs to escape. I nodded, wiping tears from my eyes, and together we walked back into our quiet house that suddenly felt emptier than it ever had before. The slow unraveling. 6 months of watching her disappear. Over the next 6 months, I watched my daughter systematically disappear. Not physically, but in every way that mattered. She was everywhere online and nowhere in real life. Her face appeared on my screen constantly. Instagram stories, TikTok videos, YouTube thumbnails. But the person in those images wasn't Emma. It was a performance of Emma. A carefully curated version designed for maximum engagement. Her social media had once been personal. Photos of books she was reading, snapshots of nature walks, genuine moments captured without artifice. Now it was an extension of Blake's brand. Every post professional and soulless. She smiled in every photo, but the smile never reached her eyes. Her captions sounded like advertisements. Her life had become a 24/7 commercial for a lifestyle she didn't seem to be living. I tried calling her directly. She rarely answered. When she did, Blake was always there in the background. I could hear him, sometimes see him if it was a video call, his presence looming even when he wasn't speaking. Every conversation felt monitored, edited, unsafe. Hey, Mom, can I call you back? We're in the middle of filming a sponsored segment. Mom, I'm fine. Really. Stop worrying so much. You're being a little overbearing. Mom, Blake thinks maybe we need some space, some boundaries. You text me like 15 times a day, and it's a lot. Space, boundaries, overbearing, the vocabulary of isolation, packaged as reasonable requests. The truth was, I texted her maybe twice a week. But Blake needed to separate her from her support system, and rewriting reality was part of his strategy. I noticed other things too, details that haunted me during sleepless nights. When Emma did visit, rare occasions now, always brief, always with Blake present, she wore long sleeves even in summer. She jumped at sudden noises. She checked her phone constantly, eyes darting with anxiety whenever a notification appeared, scanning Blake's messages like a student checking answers before a test. Her laugh had changed. It was higher now, performative, fake. The real Emma had a deep, genuine laugh that came from her belly and made her eyes crinkle. This new laugh was a sound effect. One afternoon in late July, Emma came over alone for the first time in months. Blake was traveling for a quote 89 in Los Angeles. I'd seized the opportunity immediately, inviting her for lunch, promising her favorite soup and fresh bread. She arrived looking exhausted, wearing a long-sleeved linen shirt despite the 80-degree heat. We sat on the back patio, and for the first few minutes, we made small talk about nothing. The weather, the garden, a book she was supposedly reading, but clearly wasn't. Then I asked the question that had been haunting me for months. Emma's spoon clattered against her bowl. Her face went white. What? No, Mom, God, why would you even... But she couldn't finish the sentence. Her eyes filled with tears, she blinked back furiously, violently. Quote 9-2, high standards, stressful, fine. The vocabulary of someone being slowly crushed, rearranging words to make abuse sound like ambition. Her voice cracked. I felt like I'd been slapped. Emma, that's not true. I want you to be happy. If Blake made you happy, I'd love him. But you're not happy. Look at yourself. You've lost 20 pounds. You don't sleep. You don't smile. Really smile. You've given up everything you loved, your education, your plans, your friends, your family. That's not love. That's control. You don't understand, Emma whispered, tears now streaming down her face openly. It's complicated. The influencer lifestyle is complicated. There's pressure you can't imagine. Algorithms change, followers are fickle. Sponsors are demanding. Blake is under so much stress, and sometimes he gets frustrated. But he's never hurt me. He wouldn't. Emotional abuse is still abuse, I said gently. Financial control is abuse. Isolation is abuse. He's not isolating me. Emma's voice rose, defensive and desperate. Quote 102, quote 103, I asked, keeping my voice gentle but pressing the point. Quote 104. Emma stared at her soup, tears dripping into the bowl, and said nothing. Because there was no answer. Or the answer was too terrible to speak aloud. After a long, awful silence, she stood up. Quote 105, quote 106, quote 107. She left. I stood on the patio watching her drive away in the car Blake had bought her, tracking app installed. Later I'd learn. And I felt helpless in a way I'd never experienced before. Watching your child suffer and being unable to help is a special kind of torture. It's a drowning you witness from the shore, screaming for them to swim but watching them sink while they insist they're fine. They're just resting. They chose this. Leave them alone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Richard breathed steadily beside me. And I made a decision. If Emma wouldn't leave, if she wouldn't accept help, then I needed to build a lifeboat she didn't know existed yet. So when she was finally ready, when the abuse became undeniable, when Blake's control finally cracked, when she hit bottom, there would be something to catch her. I woke Richard up at 2 a.m. I said, "Richard," still half asleep but already understanding, nodded slowly. He said, and he did. Richard's investigation. Following the money, Richard had been a forensic accountant for 35 years before retiring. He'd investigated embezzlement schemes, Ponzi schemes, money laundering operations, tax fraud that would make your head spin. He'd brought down executives, politicians, religious leaders, anyone who thought they were too clever to get caught. If anyone could dig into Blake Richardson's finances and find the cracks, it was Richard. He started the next morning, setting up shop in his home office with the same methodical precision he'd brought to every case of his career. Multiple monitors, legal pads for notes, Excel spreadsheets color-coded by category. He approached Blake Richardson like any other white-collar criminal. Assume nothing, verify everything, follow the money. "What exactly are you looking for?" I asked, bringing him coffee 3 hours into his investigation. "Anything that gives us leverage," Richard replied, eyes never leaving his screen. "Fraud, tax evasion, contract violations, debt, lies. Men like Blake build houses of cards. They look impressive until you examine the foundation. Then you realize it's all held together with lies and credit." He started with public records. Blake's LLC, registered in Delaware for maximum opacity. His business licenses, or lack thereof. His social media profiles, where he claimed to be a, quote, 117, quote, and quote, 118, quote, 119, quote, Richard snorted, quote, 120. He pulled tax records, the ones that were public at least. Blake's LLC had reported modest income, barely enough to justify the lifestyle he presented online. Either he was hiding income, which was tax fraud, or he was living on debt, which was a house of cards waiting to collapse. Richard cross-referenced Blake's claimed sponsorship deals with actual corporate filings. Several companies Blake claimed to partner with had no record of any agreement. He was lying about his sponsors, inflating his success, performing wealth he didn't have. "Fake it till you make it," Richard muttered. "Except he's not making it. He's just faking it." Then Richard went deeper. He pulled credit reports, technically a gray area legally, but Richard had contacts who owed him favors, and ethics were negotiable when your daughter was in danger. What he found was staggering. Blake Richardson was drowning in debt. 7 credit cards, all maxed out. Total debt, $147,000. Personal loans from predatory online lenders, $63,000. Car lease he couldn't afford, $1,200 per month. House rental, $4,500 per month for a McMansion he used as a backdrop for his quote, _123 content. His monthly expenses exceeded his income by thousands. He was robbing Peter to pay Paul, making minimum payments on one card with another card, floating on the edge of total financial collapse. "Quote 124, I asked, reading over Richard's shoulder, horrified by the numbers. "He's not," Richard replied grimly. "He's dying slowly, and when he goes down, he'll take Emma with him." But that wasn't the worst of it. Richard discovered that Blake had been violating sponsorship agreements left and right. Companies paid him to promote products honestly. He was posting fake reviews for money, violating FTC disclosure requirements, breaching contracts, Any one of those violations could result in lawsuits. He found evidence of wire fraud. Blake had set up fake, quote, 127 to write off personal costs, claiming his entire lifestyle as tax-deductible. His Tesla? Business expense. His designer clothes? Business expense. Vacations? Business expenses. All lies, all fraud. Quote 128, Richard said, compiling everything into a detailed report, cross-referenced and documented. I asked desperately. Richard said slowly, "We didn't know how dangerous. Not yet." The escalation, Blake's content pivot. Blake's career was imploding, and even I could see it. His subscriber counts were declining, not dramatically, but steadily. The slow bleed of an audience losing interest. His engagement was dropping. Comments sections that used to overflow with praise now filled with criticism, skepticism, people calling out his obvious fakery. This guy is so fake. Why does his lifestyle look expensive but his content feel cheap? His wife always looks miserable, lol. Anyone else think this dude is a narcissist? Blake couldn't buy engagement anymore. The algorithm gods had turned against him. And when your entire identity is built on attention, losing that attention is existential death. So he pivoted. Desperate men make desperate choices. His new content strategy appeared overnight, and it was ugly. Instead of aspirational lifestyle content, he started creating drama. Public feuds with other influencers, manufactured or real, it didn't matter. Controversial takes designed to go viral through outrage. Increasingly unhinged rants about cancel culture, about haters, about loyalty, about how hard it was to be him. His content became darker, angrier, more unstable. And he started featuring Emma more, but not as a partner, as a target. The first video appeared on a Tuesday morning. When your wife doesn't support your dreams. I watched it, horrified, as Blake ranted for 11 minutes about Emma's, quote, 138, her, quote, 139, her, quote, 140. He talked about her, quote, 141, her, quote, 142, her, quote, 143. Private struggles she'd shared with him in confidence, now weaponized for content. He filmed her crying in the background, a blur of blonde hair and tears. And when she begged him to stop recording, he zoomed in on her face. The video went viral. 2 million views in 24 hours. The comments were split. Half sympathized with Blake, praising him for his honesty and vulnerability, thanking him for keeping it real. The other half saw through him immediately, calling him abusive, demanding Emma leave, offering her help. But Blake had found his new strategy. Exploit Emma's suffering for content. Document her pain for engagement. Turn her trauma into views. The videos got worse. Quote 147. 11 minutes of Blake berating Emma for being 5 minutes late to pick him up, calling her unreliable, useless, a burden. Quote 148. Blake's version of our lunch, edited to make us look controlling and him look reasonable. I caught her texting her mom behind my back. Blake confronting Emma for going behind his back to contact me, as if talking to your mother required permission. Each video was more humiliating than the last. Each one stripped Emma of another layer of dignity. Each one was viewed by millions. And Emma, trapped in his ecosystem, isolated from everyone who loved her, financially dependent, emotionally destroyed, couldn't escape. I called her every day. She never answered. I contacted lawyers, desperate for options. Quote 151, they told me, kind but firm. Quote 152, I filed police reports anyway, desperate for documentation, for paper trails, for something. Quote 153, I felt like I was losing my mind. My daughter was being destroyed in real time, broadcast to the world in high definition, and nobody could help. The system couldn't save her. The law couldn't save her. Only Emma could save herself, and Blake had convinced her she couldn't. I stopped sleeping. I lay awake at night, staring at my phone, scrolling through Blake's content, watching my daughter suffer over and over again, screaming internally at the nightmare we'd fallen into. Richard, methodical as ever, kept investigating, kept documenting, building the case, gathering evidence, preparing for the moment when Emma would be ready. When she hits bottom, Richard said quietly one sleepless night, both of us awake at 3 a.m., she'll need something to push against to climb out. We're building that something. Stay strong. I didn't feel strong. I felt broken. And then came the live stream that changed everything. Character count, 29,742, continuing to reach 60,000. The live stream. When performance became crime. It was a Friday night in late October, the kind of cold autumn evening where the house felt too big and too quiet. Richard and I were having dinner, leftovers reheated in the microwave, neither of us with much appetite or energy for cooking. The kitchen was warm, but the warmth didn't reach me. Everything felt distant, muted, like I was living underwater. My phone sat on the table between us, face up, volume on, a habit I'd developed in recent months, terrified I'd miss a call from Emma. It buzzed once, then again. Then it started buzzing continuously, a cascade of notifications that wouldn't stop. I grabbed it, heart already racing before I even saw what was happening. Texts from Emma's college roommate, from her former study group, from people I barely knew or didn't know at all, from my sister across the country, from our neighbor. Everyone, all at once, all saying the same thing. I opened Instagram with shaking hands. Blake's profile. He was live. The view count was climbing. 300,000 people watching. 320,000. 350,000. The video loaded. My breath stopped. The video showed Emma sitting in a chair in their living room. That pristine, styled living room with the ring lights and the backdrops and the perfect aesthetic. But there was nothing aesthetic about this. Her hands were bound to the armrests with plastic zip ties, the kind you can't break without tools. Her face was blotchy and swollen from crying. Tears streamed down her cheeks, dripping off her chin. She looked terrified. Blake was behind the camera, pacing, his voice loud and manic, with a performative energy that made my skin crawl. Quote, 160. His tone was inappropriately cheerful, like a game show host announcing a prize. Quote, 161. The comment section was absolute chaos, scrolling too fast to read. People screaming at him to let her go, others laughing, thinking it was staged, others egging him on. Everyone watching the train wreck unfold in real time. Quote 162. Blake's voice rose with artificial excitement. Let's put a price on our relationship. Let's see what Emma's actually worth to the people who claim to love her. He moved the camera to show a whiteboard beside Emma, the kind he used for planning content. On it, written in red dry erase marker in letters 2 feet high. Emma's freedom, $500,000 time remaining. 3 minutes below that, a digital countdown timer, the kind you can buy on Amazon for $20. It ticked down. 2 hours, 59 minutes, 58 seconds, 57 seconds. Each second, a drop of poison. Blake circled back to the camera, his face filling the frame, his eyes too bright, too wide, teetering on the edge of complete psychological breakdown. Quote 165. He turned the camera to Emma's face, zoomed in, captured every tear, every sob, every moment of her terror and humiliation. 375,000 people watching. If they don't pay, Blake's voice dropped, theatrical and menacing. Underscore, quote, underscore 167, underscore the screen split. Professional editing. Done in advance. This wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. One half showed Emma crying, trapped. The other half showed Blake's PayPal QR code and the email address for wire transfers. Quote, 168, Blake announced. And the countdown began in earnest. Quote, 169, 390,000 viewers. The comments. Quote, 170, quote, 171, quote, 172, quote, 173, quote, 174, quote, 175. My hands were shaking so violently, I almost dropped the phone. Richard grabbed it from me, his face drained of color, watching with the horrified focus of someone witnessing a car crash. Richard whispered. My first instinct was panic. Call the police. Wire the money. Do something, anything, immediately. Save my daughter. But then something else rose up inside me. Something cold and clarifying and absolutely furious. Blake thought he had power. He thought he could terrorize us, manipulate us, force us to play his game. He thought he'd created a situation where we had no choice but to give him what he wanted. He thought wrong. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a crime. And I had spent 6 months preparing for something exactly like this. Not this specifically, but the moment when Blake's control would break down, when he'd go too far, when he'd finally cross the line from emotional abuse into something the law couldn't ignore. Richard had built us a weapon. Now it was time to use it. I stood up, walked to Richard's office with steady steps, and picked up the phone. I dialed a number Richard had given me 6 weeks ago, a number I'd saved under a fake name in case Blake ever checked my phone. A number I'd hoped I'd never need. Someone answered on the second ring. Quote 178, my voice was steady. Calmer than it had any right to be. Cold with purpose. Quote 179. There was a brief pause. Then Agent Chen's voice, sharp and focused. Send me the link. Don't do anything. Don't contact him. Don't negotiate. We're moving now. I forwarded the link. Then I hung up. Richard stared at me. You're not going to pay. I'm not going to pay, I confirmed. He might hurt her. The FBI will be there in minutes. And if we pay, he wins. He learns this works. He does it again. He does it to someone else. This ends now. Richard nodded slowly, understanding blooming in his eyes. Then he picked up his own phone. Who are you calling? I asked. Everyone, Richard said grimly. The IRS, the state attorney general, the credit card companies he's defrauded, the sponsors whose contracts he violated. If Blake Richardson is going down, he's going down for everything. And while our daughter sat terrified on camera, while 350,000 people watched and commented and shared, while Blake performed his manufactured crisis for an audience that was about to become witnesses to his arrest, Richard and I executed our plan. We'd spent 6 months building a case. It took 15 minutes to deploy it. The 15 minutes that destroyed him. While Blake performed for his viewers, while the timer ticked down, while the world watched his grotesque spectacle. 3 things happened simultaneously that he didn't anticipate. First, the FBI's cyber action team traced Blake's IP address and physical location in 90 seconds. They dispatched agents from the nearest field office, 12 minutes away, with instructions to treat this as an active hostage situation. Negotiators were scrambled. SWAT was placed on standby. Second, Instagram's trust and safety team, already drowning in thousands of user reports, flagged the live stream as depicting criminal activity and began coordinating with law enforcement. They didn't shut down the stream, not yet. It was evidence. Every second was being recorded, preserved, documented. Third, Richard, using his extensive network of contacts built over 35 years of financial investigation, simultaneously forwarded Blake Richardson's complete financial history to 8 different agencies and organizations. The IRS received documentation of $127,000 in unreported income and fraudulent tax deductions. The Delaware Secretary of State received evidence of corporate fraud and false filing. 3 major credit card companies received evidence of systematic fraud and terms of service violations. The State Attorney General received documentation of wire fraud, identity theft. Blake had opened credit cards in Emma's name without her knowledge, we'd later discover, and consumer fraud. The Federal Trade Commission received evidence of over 200 violations of sponsorship disclosure requirements. The house of cards began to collapse in real time. But Blake, narcissistic and delusional, high on the attention of 400,000 viewers, noticed nothing. I watched the live stream with Richard beside me, my hand holding my now cold tea, my other hand gripping his. I didn't call Blake. I didn't send money. I didn't negotiate. I waited. On screen, Blake was getting increasingly agitated. The PayPal account showed 0 donations. His viewer count was rising, but his income was not. The comment section had turned almost entirely against him. Call the police, someone. Emma, blink if you need help. This man is going to prison. Catherine, don't pay him. This is extortion. I called the FBI and gave them this link. Blake checked his PayPal compulsively, refreshing every 30 seconds, his performance becoming more frantic with each 0 balance. Come on, Catherine, he shouted at the camera, using my name like a weapon, like we were familiar, like he had any right. I know you're watching. You've got... He checked the timer. 2 hours and 40 minutes. Are you really going to let your daughter suffer because you're too cheap to save her? Emma's sobbing had quieted to exhausted, defeated whimpering. She'd given up. She looked broken. Blake paced in front of the camera, his perfect hair disheveled now. Sweat visible on his forehead, his carefully maintained image cracking. Maybe she's not worth it to you, huh? Maybe you don't actually love her. Maybe all your concerned parent bullshit was just talk. 420,000 viewers. Blake didn't realize he'd created the most comprehensive evidence package for his own prosecution that any prosecutor could dream of. Every word was recorded, every moment documented, every threat preserved in crystal clear HD. He kept ranting. You know what? Maybe I don't even want the money. Maybe this was never about money. Maybe this is about showing the world who you people really are. Controlling, manipulative. You never supported us. You never believed in me. You tried to poison Emma against me from day one. He was spiraling, losing the thread, his narcissism unraveling into incoherence. I'm the victim here, he continued, his voice rising to a shout. I'm the one who's been abused by your family. I'm the one who's been disrespected and undermined and... The doorbell rang. Blake froze mid-sentence. Emma's head lifted. 445,000 people watching. Quote, 200 . The color drained from Blake's face. For 3 full seconds, he stood completely still, staring at the door, his brain visibly failing to process what was happening. No, he whispered. Then louder. No, this was supposed to... Blake Richardson, you have 10 seconds to open this door before we breach. 10, 9. Blake ran toward the door. Whether to open it or barricade it, whether to comply or flee, I'll never know. The live stream camera, still running on its tripod, still broadcasting to 450,000 people, captured everything. Quote 204. Blake's hand reached for the doorknob. 5, 4. He hesitated. 3, 2. He tried to open it. Too late. The door exploded inward with a crack like thunder. Federal agents in tactical gear swarmed through the opening, moving with the practiced precision of people who'd done this 1,000 times. Guns drawn. Commands shouted. Blake tried to speak. An agent swept his legs. Blake went down hard, face first into his carefully styled floor, his expensive Persian rug, his perfect aesthetic backdrop. The impact was audible even through the live stream audio. Quote 209 2 agents knelt on Blake's back, securing his wrists with zip ties, the same kind he'd used on Emma. Poetic justice in plastic. Blake was crying now, actual tears, his performance face completely gone. Quote 210, quote 211. The agent began, and Blake finally shut up. Meanwhile, 2 other agents moved immediately to Emma. One cut the zip ties on her wrists with a practiced snick of a blade. The other wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, speaking in low, calm tones. Quote 212. Emma collapsed into the agent's arms, sobbing. But this time, the sobs were different. Relief. Release, the sound of someone finally allowed to break. The live stream kept running for another 3 minutes before Instagram finally terminated it. By then, it had been screen recorded and uploaded 1,000 times across every platform. Evidence preserved forever. Blake Richardson's face-down arrest, crying and begging and stripped of every shred of dignity, became the most viral content he'd ever produced. 462,000 people watched him get exactly what he deserved. 15 minutes. That's all it took to end him. Not with money, not with negotiation, not by playing his game, by refusing to play at all. Character count, approximately 60,000. Continuing with the final sections. Aftermath. The first night, Richard and I arrived at the FBI field office at 3 in the morning. Agent Chen met us in the lobby, a man in his late 40s, tired but kind eyes, the rumpled look of someone who'd been woken up and thrown into crisis mode. Mr. and Mrs. Morrison, he said, shaking our hands firmly. Emma's being evaluated by medical personnel right now. Physically, she's okay. Minor injuries from the restraints, dehydration. But she's safe. Can we see her? I asked, my voice breaking on the words. Soon, Agent Chen said gently. We need to take her statement first. But I wanted to tell you, what you did tonight was extraordinary. By not paying, by contacting us immediately, you saved your daughter's life and possibly prevented this man from trying something like this again. He'll be charged? Richard asked. Kidnapping, unlawful restraint, extortion, domestic battery, criminal threat. And that's just from tonight. The financial materials you provided, Mr. Morrison, that's another several dozen federal charges. Wire fraud, tax evasion, identity theft. Blake Richardson is going to prison for a very long time. 2 hours later, we were finally allowed to see Emma. She was in a private room, wearing hospital scrubs someone had found for her own clothes taken as evidence. Her wrists were bandaged where the zip ties had cut into her skin. She looked impossibly young, impossibly fragile, curled up in a chair that was too big for her. When she saw us, she started crying again. I ran to her, gathered her into my arms, held her the way I'd held her when she was small and afraid of thunderstorms. Quote 220. She sobbed into my shoulder. Quote 221, quote, 222. I whispered, stroking her hair, rocking her gently. Quote, 223, quote, 224, she cried. Quote, 225, quote, 226, Richard said firmly, kneeling beside us, his hand on Emma's back. You were abused. Systematically, deliberately abused by someone who spent years breaking you down. That's not stupidity. That's survival. We stayed there for another hour, just holding her, letting her cry, letting her release 3 years of trapped terror and pain. Finally, when her sobs had quieted to hiccups, she pulled back and looked at me with red, swollen eyes. You didn't pay him, she whispered. No, I said simply. Why? He could have, he might have hurt you, I acknowledged. And that was the worst moment of my life, making that choice. But if I paid him, Emma, he would have won. He would have learned that terrorism works, that he could control us forever. And next time, because there would have been a next time, he might have asked for more, or done worse. This had to end. Emma nodded slowly, understanding blooming in her exhausted eyes. You saved me, not by giving him what he wanted, by refusing to. Yes, I said simply. We took her home that night, home to her childhood bedroom, to the bed where she'd slept for 18 years before Blake Richardson entered her life. We tucked her in like she was 5 years old again, and I sat beside her bed holding her hand until she finally fell asleep. Safe, home, free, recovery and reckoning. The long road back or the next 6 months were a process of slow, painful healing. Emma had been traumatized, isolated, controlled, and destroyed over 3 years. You don't recover from that overnight. You don't bounce back. You rebuild slowly, one day at a time. We got her into therapy immediately. Dr. Sarah Walsh, a trauma specialist who worked specifically with survivors of intimate partner violence. Emma saw her 3 times a week at first, working through the complex PTSD, the anxiety, the depression, the deep self-blame that abuse always leaves behind. She had panic attacks, nightmares, mornings where she couldn't get out of bed, moments where she'd defend Blake's actions. He was just under a lot of stress. The influencer life is hard. I wasn't a good partner. And then break down crying when she realized what she was saying, how deeply his manipulation had rooted itself in her brain. We never pushed. We never rushed. We just stayed present. Richard and I both took turns being home with her those first few months. She didn't want to be alone. She was terrified Blake would somehow get out, come back, find her. Even though he was in federal custody with no bail, even though the evidence against him was overwhelming, even though he had zero power anymore, the fear remained. Slowly, very slowly, Emma started coming back to herself. She started eating again. Real meals, not the restricted diet Blake had imposed. Her face filled out. Color returned to her cheeks. The dark circles faded. She started reading again. Her old passion, the thing Blake had mocked as, quote, 238 and, quote, 239. She devoured books like someone making up for lost time. I'd find her on the couch at 2 a.m, curled up with a novel, actually smiling. She cut her hair, short, pixie length. Nothing like the long blonde hair Blake had insisted on for the aesthetic. She came home from the salon looking younger, freer, more like herself. She deleted all her social media, every platform, every account, every trace of her digital existence. I need to exist offline for a while, she told us. I need to remember who I am when nobody's watching. 4 months after the live stream, Emma applied to return to her graduate program. She wrote a letter to the dean explaining her situation, honestly, vulnerably, asking for a second chance. The university accepted her immediately. Full scholarship, living stipend, academic support. They'd been following her story in the news and wanted to help her rebuild. When the acceptance letter arrived, Emma cried. But this time, they were tears of relief, of hope. Quote, 243, she whispered, clutching the letter like a lifeline. Quote, 244, quote, 245, I told her. Quote, 246, she started classes in the fall. Library science, her first love. She thrived. Her professors were supportive, her classmates were kind, and most importantly, she was free to be herself. No performance, no content, just learning. 6 months after the live stream, Emma was sitting at our breakfast table again, this time on a regular basis, between classes and study sessions. The sunlight caught her hair, now grown out a bit but still short. She was reading a book about medieval manuscript preservation, taking notes in the margins with that intense focus I remembered from her childhood. Quote, 247, she said without looking up. Quote, 248, quote, 249. I set down my coffee cup. Quote, 250, quote, 251. She interrupted, looking up now, her eyes clear and strong in a way they hadn't been in years. But I need to say it again. If you'd paid, he would have won. He would have gotten away with it. And he would have done it again, to me or someone else. You didn't negotiate with him. You ended it. That took incredible courage, thank you. I smiled, tears pricking my eyes. You would have done the same for me? I hope so, Emma said softly. I hope I'd have that strength. You do, I assured her. You survived him. That took more strength than anything I did. The trial. Justice. Finally, Blake Richardson's trial began 14 months after the live stream. He'd been held without bail all that time. Flight risk, danger to others. The charges too serious to allow release. The prosecution had an embarrassment of riches. The live stream video alone was damning. 462,000 witnesses, every word recorded, every threat documented. But they also had Richard's financial investigation, Emma's testimony, a parade of experts on domestic violence and coercive control. Blake tried to represent himself initially, convinced his charisma would win over a jury. His attorney quit after 2 weeks, citing irreconcilable differences. Blake refused to accept reality, insisted he'd done nothing wrong, believed he could charm his way out of federal charges. The judge, a woman named Sandra Martinez, who'd seen too many cases like this, allowed Blake to represent himself. It was a disaster for him. He rambled. He played the victim. He argued that it had all been performance art and satire and social commentary. The live stream was a commentary on parasocial relationships and the commodification of intimacy in digital culture. Blake actually said during his opening statement, "I was making art." The jury stared at him in disbelief. Emma took the stand on day 6. I sat in the gallery, Richard beside me, holding my breath as she walked to the witness box. She looked strong, professional. She wore a simple blue dress, her short hair styled neatly, her shoulders back. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Jennifer Coe, led Emma through her testimony with gentle precision. The beginning of the relationship, the love bombing, the charm, the promises. The slow isolation, cutting her off from friends, family, her own dreams. The financial control, the emotional abuse, the public humiliation, the final live stream. Emma's voice never wavered. She spoke clearly, calmly, factually. This was her story, and she was taking it back. Blake tried to cross-examine her. It went poorly for him. He asked, with that familiar condescending smile. Emma replied simply. Blake's smile faltered. The jury was nodding. "Isn't it true that you agreed to help build my brand?" "I did," Emma acknowledged. "But I didn't agree to work without pay. I didn't agree to surrender my identity. I didn't agree to be humiliated publicly. And I definitely didn't agree to be tied to a chair while you tried to extort my parents." The courtroom was silent. Blake had no response. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. Guilty on all counts. 47 counts total. Kidnapping, extortion, domestic battery, criminal threat, wire fraud, tax evasion, identity theft, violations of sponsorship agreements, violations of consumer protection laws. The list went on and on. Judge Martinez looked at Blake with undisguised contempt as she delivered the sentence. "Mr. Richardson," she began, her voice sharp and clear, "I have been a judge for 23 years. I have seen many criminals, but rarely have I seen someone so thoroughly devoid of empathy, so completely narcissistic, so utterly convinced of their own righteousness despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary." Blake stared at her, his face pale. "You exploited your wife," Judge Martinez continued. "You commodified her suffering. You isolated her from everyone who loved her. And when she finally tried to escape, you held her hostage for profit, broadcasting her terror to hundreds of thousands of people. You showed no remorse, no empathy, no recognition of her humanity." The courtroom was absolutely silent. "This court sentences you to 23 years in federal prison. You will serve a minimum of 18 years before being eligible for parole. You will be required to pay restitution to your victim. You will be permanently barred from creating any public content, social media presence, or commercial exploitation of your crimes." Blake's mouth opened. No sound came out. Judge Martinez finished coldly. Blake was led away in handcuffs, his perfect aesthetic destroyed, his empire ashes, his name a cautionary tale. Emma sat beside me in the gallery, holding my hand. When the sentence was read, she closed her eyes and exhaled. A breath she'd been holding for 4 years. Blake turned to look at us one last time as they led him away, searching for what, I don't know. Pity? Fear? Submission? Some last shred of the control he used to have? He found none of it. Emma stared back at him with calm, clear, strong eyes. Quote, 277, she said quietly. And then we walked out of that courtroom into the afternoon sunlight. And Emma was finally, completely, irrevocably free. 2 years later, the life she built. Emma defended her master's thesis on a bright morning in May, 2 years after the live stream, 3 years after coming home. Her topic: digital abuse and the exploitation of intimacy in social media culture, a survivor's analysis. She cited her own experience, but clinically, academically, transformed into research and scholarship. She turned her trauma into knowledge, into a tool to help others recognize abuse patterns in digital relationships. The defense was flawless. Her committee was impressed. When she walked out with her degree officially conferred, Richard and I stood and applauded until our hands hurt. That evening, we had dinner on our back patio. The same patio where I'd sat 2 years ago in helpless horror, watching Emma's life unravel in real time. But tonight, everything was different. Emma was laughing, telling stories about her graduate cohort, making plans to pursue her doctorate at Columbia. She'd been accepted with full funding. She was thriving. I got approached by a documentary team, she mentioned casually, spearing a piece of grilled salmon. They want to make a film about digital abuse and coercive control, using my case as the framework. How do you feel about that? Richard asked carefully. We'd learned to let Emma set her own pace, make her own choices, reclaim her own narrative. Emma replied, and there was strength in her voice, confidence. Quote 283. She paused, setting down her fork, looking at both of us with eyes that had seen darkness, but found their way back to light. Quote 284, she said quietly. Quote 285. I smiled, my heart full. That was my daughter, not the broken girl who'd come home 2 years ago, not the shell of a person Blake had created. The woman who'd survived, who'd healed, who refused to let her trauma define her. I'm so proud of you, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I know, Emma said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. I know, and I'm proud of me too. Finally. She had every reason to be. She'd finished her degree, published 3 academic papers, begun consulting with tech companies on digital safety features, started speaking at universities about recognizing abuse in relationships, built a life entirely her own, and she was dating someone new. A kind, quiet librarian named Marcus, who worked at the university. He made her laugh. He supported her dreams. He never asked her to perform or post or document their relationship. Their life together was private, offline, real. She'd reclaimed everything Blake had stolen, her autonomy, her identity, her future. And Blake? Blake was in year 2 of a 23-year sentence, his name forgotten by the internet that had once been his obsession, his social media empire.